tackle some of these big issues. And so it's really exciting to come together and talk through all of the great processes and procedures and things that we can get involved with. So yeah, if we go to the next slide. As you know, this is Design Week. There's a lot of designers on the call, I'm sure, but we wanted to really pause and make sure and clarify what we're talking about. And so we wanted to clarify some definitions here. So next slide, please. So design is the art or profession of using design elements such as typography and images to convey information or create an effect or action. And then the next one. Marc, you want to take that one?
Yeah, and then what do we mean by the climate crisis? Well, it's a significant and long-lasting change in the Earth's climate and weather patterns directly caused by us, by humans and our activities.
So yeah, the big question at hand today, what is design and why is it important to address the climate crisis? So let's get right into it. Next, please.
Awesome. So I love this question, and I'm going to try to give you my response in a way that doesn't, scare you. So I believe that design shapes culture. We need to become conscious of the narratives created by our dominant culture, and designers need to recognize that we've been shaped by that narrative and that we have shaped that narrative. And recognizing that that narrative has caused our climate breakdown is really important. But we also understand that we can shape new narratives and create a different story. And we can turn this ship around and contribute towards reimagining and designing a world that benefits all living beings. I believe design is more than just aesthetics. I think it's a responsibility held by practitioners that is weighted by ethics and values. I really do consider us at the same level of a doctor or a lawyer. Our work affects people's lives, right? We can harm or we can heal. I believe that we're gatekeepers. Once our designs enter the ether of society, its impact will be out of our hands. And I believe that if we feel that something isn't right, we should definitely speak up. And I always tell my students this. I teach part-time here in San Francisco at a school called CCA. Design is education. And when you have a design degree or when you're practicing design, you should also be practicing design education. But to dive deeper into that, I think we really need to understand and educate ourselves deeply about the business that we're in and truly understand how global capitalism works and how we are workers and players of mass consumption. And design has contributed to the climate crisis just as much as fossil fuels and methane. And if anything, it's the driver. But once we educate ourselves and once we realize that we can change these systems, we can design better systems. And then that's when that reality that I mentioned earlier, that's when that punches us in the face. And that's when we level up. And that's when we show up to our work as a better designer. And so I believe that we have amazing skills that no doubt can play a huge role in reversing our course and rebalancing our planet's living systems. So I'm going to hand it over to Casey.
Yeah, thanks, Marc. So yeah, design is a way of thinking. If we go to the next slide, I mean, if you want to look through my talking points here, but as designers, we look at the world differently. We've been trained to look, at our environment in very different ways than the rest of the rest of us. We zoom in and obsess over tiny distances between two letters, right? We'll spend hours kerning and tracking and working on leading for typography. We see things that others just don't see. When we zoom out, when we're driving down the highway and we see a billboard with like way too many letters, right? And it's awful. No one's gonna read that. Like, who did that? Those things spin us out. It really permeates every interaction we have in the world. If we get a piece of junk mail in the mail and like the colors are shifted, right? We just want to fix these things. And so we're constantly examining patterns and hierarchy and spatial relations. And we're hyper focused on making things better. And so to that point, design solves problems. We see things, when we see things that aren't quite right, we go to work. We fix things, we reorganize, and we iterate, and we optimize everything that we can get our hands on, really. And so ultimately, design is communication, and we are storytellers. And so we take complex, complicated, and disparate ideas and concepts, and distill them down into digestible, engaging, and actionable messaging, right? So this allows us to shift narratives, and I think this is a really important thing that we as designers can do, is this is shifting narratives, right? So you go into the news, and it's all doom and gloom, and then you go onto social media and you're like doom scrolling. It can kind of get you down, right? Like there's just a lot happening in the world that we have to process. And but the truth is, the world that we work in, and the clients and the projects that Marc and I are honored to work on, these are people that are out there making change and positively affecting the world. It's not the narrative that we see. We're very optimistic, and we see people boots on the ground, affecting positive change and impact. So we are the storytellers that can shift those narratives, and that's really exciting and important. All right, next slide, please. So how does design show up in our lives?
Next, or
next? Yeah, next, please.
Okay, sorry.
So design is everywhere. Almost everything we interact with is designed. Cell phones, buildings, billboards, toothbrushes, they're all designed. And we need to think through those things through to the end user and beyond. Our work, our designs don't just live in the ether, right? They manifest and they live in our environment. And they take the form of magazines and packaging on office spaces and subways. And they're made of plastic and ink and rubber sometimes, right? So we need to think through how and where our designs show up. And we're designers, and we're also consumers, right? Like what we work on and what we design, we're also on the other end of that. We participate in the consumption of those things. So it's just important to think through that, and really think on both ends, and think through the customer journey, right? And that's really just an important take on it as well.
Awesome. So I think it's also the questions that we ask ourselves, when we're interacting with a thing, an object that we have in our lives, or if we're experiencing a certain space, we're like, why does this work like that? Or why is it designed this way? Like it's what we ask ourselves. That's how design shows up. And we notice bad design, and we tend not to notice good design because it just works. There's a quote that I'm forgetting the person who created it. He says something along the lines of like, good design, when it's well done, it becomes invisible. It's only when it's done poorly that we notice it. I also think, much like what Casey was saying, it's what we consume. We consume design every minute of every day. Everything around us is design. Everything that we interact with, that we see, has been touched by a designer. That's mind-blowing, right? And so sometimes we engage with that thing for literally seconds. Maybe it's the little packet of sugar that you put in your to-go coffee, and then you throw the packet away. Like that's literally in your hands for 3 seconds. Other times in our lives, that design lasts for decades, right? It's hand-me-downs from your previous generations. And so we consume this stuff, and this stuff takes up space. I have some colleagues of mine actually don't use the phrase climate change or climate crisis. They actually call it the great pollution. I think it fits well, right? It's the pollution that we see visibly around us, the waste that we produced. the destruction of our environment, as well as the pollution of having too much CO2 in the air and other greenhouse gases. And I also believe that it's inspiration for something more. It's inspiration towards what's possible. And the design allows us to see the world today, only to allow us to open our eyes and our imaginations to see what else is possible in the future. So we have another question after this, if we want to skip to the next slide. How can designers show up in taking climate action? So next, please. So designers already have the skills needed. You know, we use creativity to solve problems. We have the ability to visualize ideas. We help communicate important messages. We design interactions that encourage others to take action. And so maybe some of us don't know it, but we already are sitting on the tools. Our tools are already in our toolbox that we can use to take climate action. And it's just as easy as just acknowledging that, right? I believe it's also just questioning the status quo. Like, look at our existing processes, systems, and workflows and really ask ourselves, is this contributing to the climate crisis in a negative way or a positive way? Are you asking the right questions? Are you considering the impact that your designs have? Once you hit that publish button or that print button or whatever it is that you release out into the world, your designs, like that has weight, you know? And I also believe that, you know, whether you're directly or indirectly working on climate, just do something, right? So if you're working for a climate focused organization, awesome, you know, support them however you can. Maybe you don't, and maybe you want to start one. Maybe you want to start up a climate focused startup or something like that with some friends. Go for it, right? As designers, we solve problems and build products for other people, yet we're often afraid to step into that leadership role and launch our own businesses. So as a result, our ideas get filtered through someone else's vision. So how can we feel less intimidated to bring our own ideas to life? And maybe you don't want to do any of that, and maybe you want to work on it indirectly. Great too. You know, how can you show up in your personal life? Encourage maybe your organization that you're working with that might not be so climate focused. Encourage them to think more about their impact on the climate, the environment, things like that. So Casey, what about you?
Yeah, you know, I think there's, you know, certain things we can control and certain things we can't control, right? Sort of the stoic philosophy of life and design. And I think, you know, one of the things we can sometimes control, I don't think always, I don't think we always have the luxury of controlling, but is who we work with and the projects and clients that we choose to work on. So when we can, you know, if a project comes through and, you know, you're bidding on something and you're reading through the brief and just doesn't seem quite right, you know, doesn't quite align with your values, you know, that's a moment to take action and say yes or no. Ultimately, we are amplifying the voices of our clients, right? And we can choose to you know, to who we work with and which voices we're going to amplify. I think that's, you know, that's a really powerful thing. If you think about it through that lens, it's a really powerful choice that we have to make. You know, sometimes if you're working at an agency or a design firm, you know, you get thrown a project and, you know, you don't really have the choice. But if you do, you know, and, you know, try and push back, you know, on your teams, you know, as Marc was mentioning, you know, these are sort of systemic, you know, systems that we're working in. And if you can have some sort of impact internally, and maybe shift the voice of the company that you work at, you know, that's also an amazing potential to work on as well. And, you know, empathy is at the core of design. We're constantly considering our audience, right? We're trained empathetic doers. It's just part of design thinking, right? Literally, the design thinking framework, it starts with empathy for a reason. You know, empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. You know, we have to get inside the thoughts, feelings, and attitudes of our audience on a constant basis. And so that's just a really important part that we can then take into all of these huge issues that we're faced with, right? And these issues affect everyone. So, you know, how do we look around the world and, you know, figure out those solutions? And then this is a lot. We're talking about, there's a lot of things that are affecting climate, and we see the stuff, all these issues coming up and bubbling up in the news and everywhere. And it's sometimes it can get overwhelming. But really it's all about progress, not perfection, right? Find some issues that resonate with you and focus on those. We can't solve everything all at once. So we have to pick a few and lean into those, and know that it's really about trajectories and the directions we're pushing in. We can't fix everything all at once, but know that whatever resonates with you, if you lean into that, other people are working on other amazing solutions elsewhere. So we have an hour here. Marc and I have obviously these little points and questions that we wanted to talk to you, but really it's we want to make this a dialogue as well. So we want to kind of throw it out to everyone on the call. How are you showing up and taking climate action, and what questions do you have, and what sort of solutions are you trying to work on? And so next slide, please. Raise your hand if you want to have a question, and we can talk through it. In the meantime, this is a really great framework from Ayanna Elizabeth. Her link's down there. Highly recommend following her, and all of her work is great. And this is her climate Venn diagram. It's really kind of based on the Ikigai framework, if you're familiar with that. But as how do you show up? If you look through this framework, what brings you joy, right? So sources of satisfaction and delight, coupled with what are you good at? Your skills, your resources, and your networks that you can activate. And then what work needs doing. So climate justice solutions. And then those really just helps you focus in on your personal climate action. So it's a great framework just to use. And we use it in other functions as well. And your purpose and life goals, it's a really great framework to work with. So yeah.
And
so
if I can add to
ahead.
that. So as I mentioned earlier, I teach part-time in San Francisco at California College of the Arts, and I teach a class called Climate Designers. And this is actually one of the first exercises my students do at the start of every semester. Ayanna Elizabeth Jackson, she created this as a way to help people focus their energy towards something that they can do. We all feel overwhelmed when we're, as Casey mentioned earlier, doom scrolling. We're getting bombarded by all the news and updates of how everything's going to hell in a handbasket, right? And because of that, we don't know what to do. We feel so overwhelmed with all these different things. We want to do this, we want to do that, we want to do this. And this is a really simple yet effective way of channeling where we can spend our energy. And I use this in my class because it's an opportunity for students to get a sense of, outside of their design school education, where their interests lie, where their skills come into play. And then we actually use this as a way for them to figure out what project they want to start for the rest of the semester. So spend some time on this, and knowing that this is going to change over time, where you bring in new skills into your toolkit, where you gain more interest in other areas, where you just evolve as a human being. But it's really good to kind of check in with yourself every so often to see if that core of this Venn diagram is accurate. And if it is, then yeah, start finding those opportunities to explore that. And if you're in that space for a while and it's not really giving you any sort of satisfaction, then you might want to revisit this Venn diagram. But yeah, the next slide, we have a handful of questions. We want to turn the mic over to you all. Feel free to unmute, feel free to ask questions, feel free to put your questions in the chat. But we would love to just ask those on the call, what are you doing at work? Maybe within your local community, among your family and friends. How are you showing up in the world that you live in, in terms of taking climate action? How are you talking about this with your clients and colleagues? How are you talking about this at your work? It's always an interesting question to ask folks. And then who are you seeing who's inspired you, whether it's someone in the climate space, a colleague of yours, a community, someone in your community. And what are they doing that's exciting you right now that you might want to support, lend a hand? And then what are some resources that you're aware of that you can share with the rest of the audience here? So we'll leave these questions up for a little bit. We would love to open up the floor and have a bit of a conversation.
We have a question from Libby in the chat. Libby asks, I'm currently writing a dissertation on nature-inspired design features in relation to fashion's impact on the ocean. Is nature-inspired design something you think is relevant to this and something that could be beneficial long-term?
Totally. Yeah. So the first thing I thought of, Libby, I don't know if you have stumbled upon this like new literary and visual genre called solar punk. So SOLARPUNK. It's relatively new, and it's basically a more positive outlook on how we can live within the world if we were to actually address our climate crisis. It's not the Mad Max version. It's something that's more positive and hopeful. And so I think you might want to look into that in terms of just how people are visualizing and writing about it, and how nature is living in harmony with our lives, and how we're living in harmony with nature, and how we can, be inspired by nature, right? How we can pull from it. There's also biomimicry, which I'm sure you're aware of, and if not, definitely check that out. It's a whole, I'm not super knowledgeable in that space, but it's just a whole subset of design where designers and other people are taking inspiration, literally inspiration, from nature, from animals and plants, and figuring out how they are resilient in their environments, how they are engaging with their surroundings, what makes up their body or being, and seeing how we can be inspired and mimic that. I'm not sure if I answered it all, Libby. Feel free if you want to follow up.
But that's great. Thank you. I
Yeah.
had a
Well,
go ahead.
actually, one little thing I'd love to add to that, in terms of focusing in on fashion's impact on the ocean. We're actually currently about to begin a project with this really interesting startup company called BioFluff. They're a startup. They're just getting funding, but essentially they're creating plant-based fur and plant-based materials for fashion companies. I think that's a huge segment that I'm becoming more aware of and interested in as well. And so fashion's impact. There's a company I just started following. I can't remember. Maybe we'll recap it if I can remember it. But they're traveling up and down California right now, and they're collecting used garments and material, and then they recycle them, and they basically either upcycle, redesign, and use and create new fashion out of all that. Really cool. So there's some really great startups and companies focusing on just fashion specifically, which I find very interesting. And so just there's people out there, going at it in terms of fashion and clothing, and it's just exciting to follow along.
When you're speaking about ways of pushing back in your workplace and with the company that you work at, I think that it's a tricky one, because sometimes it's, yes, like do it and you should speak up, but then sometimes I feel like it's difficult because you don't feel necessarily as empowered in your workplace as others might. And so this was something that I faced at a place that I worked in. A way that I could make a small change was, suggesting even the type of pens we use. Instead of using like a plastic Bic pen, like, could we invest in reusable pens and just putting in new cartridges? And this was like, I feel a good example of like a little micro change that you can affect in your everyday life, that's outside of just like, I'm choosing to use biodegradable products at home, but then like taking it the next step further.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think sort of the lens I look through it is, from a company-wide standpoint, right? If you're working at a company and you're trying to do as much sustainable, initiatives and actions as you can. Pens, little things like switching out the pens can make a huge impact, not only because you're doing that thing, but it's also the message you're sending, that you're considering it, you're thinking about it. It affects culture. It starts to permeate into the company's culture. And I think, from a business standpoint, people are shifting their buying patterns, and they're really, it's I like to say, like, it's no longer the 1950s, right, where there's like 3 TV channels and 2 toothbrush companies, and there's like Levi's for jeans. There's the dispersion of products and services is vast, right? So now as consumers, we have choices and we get to vote with our dollar. And so if you're a company and you're not leaning into sustainability, focusing on CSR, corporate social responsibility initiatives, you're going to lose, because the consumers want to buy goods and services from companies and organizations that align with their values. And so it's sort of change or die, right? Where my optimism comes from is you starting to see in a very tangible way companies that are just not even in the conversation, market shares dumping. So it really comes from us. It comes from consumers and designers and people who are thinking about this stuff that are really going to drive the change.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, there's research out there. What Casey's saying, you can find all these reports from all these consulting groups, research-based groups that are actually putting that and putting that evidence together. So if you do some research and you find those, you can then turn around and share with your team or your manager saying, hey, look, there's proof, y'all. Like, get on the what's the phrase? Get on the train, or before it leaves the station, right? I think there's other things too, Amanda, that I want to address in your question too, that might resonate with a lot of folks here.
Great.
So the pens, right? Okay, great. Small step, but a step. And so when you're in an organization and you want to do more, right? It might not feel as if you can, or you have the say or the voice. Then those small steps can build up, baby steps into this, right? But then at the same time, talk to your colleagues, over lunch, or maybe at happy hour or whatever. Grab a coffee and talk to them about their take about this whole thing. And the more support that you get, when you can rally people behind what you want to see changed in your organization, you'll have that support system there, and it might trickle up to the upper management, right? It might trickle all the way up to the founder. And so I think also just do your research too. So if you are proposing something, definitely have the proof, the evidence, the whatever to back your desired change up. It's one thing to just think, just one thing to just say you want to do this because it seems great, but we all know business is business, and fortunately, or maybe even unfortunately, it's all about numbers. And so they want to see proof, they want to see data. So just do the research. There's all these amazing websites nowadays where they're providing, like I said earlier, they're providing these reports to people to use, because they're there for a reason. So use them. But I also would, maybe this is a shift in conversation, but I also at the same time, there's a fine line with actually doing work and actually making the impact within your organization, and just painting on this facade of actually doing something, i.e. greenwashing, right? So there's that, there's a lot of pushback now, and people that are able to kind of read that and call it out. And I think that Casey, the group that you're referencing, who would be willing to, invest their dollars more into companies that have a more environmental, climate-focused impact, they're also the ones whose bullshit detector is pretty on point. And so, be mindful of what your company is doing and how it's presenting that to the world, because if there's any sort of holes in there, those people will find it and they will call you out.
Yeah, it's great.
Great. And Quintana, you raised your hand. Would you like to ask a question?
Hey everyone, thanks so much for this great conversation, the infographics and everything that people are sharing in the chat. It's good conversation. And I'd be curious just to hear a little bit about, we're landscape architects. There's a couple of my colleagues on this call, and we're a fairly small firm. And I feel like everybody that works in the firm is bought in. The question that we've been kind of talking about a lot recently is how to have influence with your clients. We do high-end residential design, and depending on your client, right? Some may be very bought into this conversation, and some may not be in tuned at all. We do see ourselves as influencers, and to raise the discussion whenever we can. But I'd be curious to hear from others in the room around kind of how are you influencing your clientele to make more sustainable choices within whatever industry you're in, if perhaps, because a lot of times these choices, right, are more expensive on the front end. Let's say they're going to pay off in dividends over the long term, but the initial investment is more expensive, or perhaps in our field, sometimes the aesthetics are not quite where a less sustainable choice may be. So, just having those conversations, I'd like to hear from the group if anybody has any thoughts.
Yeah, so it's a great question. Selling in sustainability can be very difficult. Remove political ideology, right? Like sometimes it's, it's more expensive. Sometimes it's not as available. And sometimes, to your point, you won't see the payoff for years. So it's kind of a large investment, but pays off over years. I think EVs are a good example of that, right? Like they might be a little more expensive, but over the life cycle of owning an EV, like you're not getting tune-ups and oil changes, so it becomes drastically less money. But it's that upfront initial cost that you kind of have to get over. I don't know. My approach is, so as we run a branding and marketing firm, and one of our sort of creative tenets at Serotonin is show, don't tell. We talk about this a lot. Just do it as if these are the only options, right? We just don't talk about, oh, this is such an amazing sustainable product. Just talk about the product and how great it is, and almost, mention offhand, oh, and by the way, you're going to recoup blah blah blah. Give the features and benefits almost at the end. Because I think a lot of those decisions really need to come from the top down. So if you're offering sustainable solutions and options, just lead with those and say, here's what we recommend. This is we're the experts, and this is what we're offering. There are other cheaper ways, but are your objectives to do this project by spending the least amount of money? If that's your objective, maybe we're not the right ones to work with, So it's framing the conversations in ways that just, lean into your objectives. If you want to push sustainable products and services, push them. It's almost sounds counterintuitive, and I'd love to hear Marc's take on this, but don't even talk about it. Just, it's actions speak louder than words, in my opinion.
One I think to add to that is speaking to your customer, your client, about the value. Like going back to Marc and Casey are talking about, there are those people that consumers us, we look for authenticity. And there's now this bridge of, we want the numbers and the data behind it, because we can tell if you're just greenwashing it. So is that a selling point then for your client of, hey, you're going to be more successful? And if you put the dollars behind something of success, because it does come down to the bottom line, that if you do go quote unquote green, like if you incorporate these types of practices into your company, whether that's in landscaping or in the materials in your packaging to your ballpoint pens, there's a value there. And I think if you can monetize that for your client, for your customer, in different ways through research and data and money, like that might help, you know, back that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you both.
Any other questions or thoughts to add to this conversation? Go ahead, Ziza.
Hi. I was looking at your cursor and I thought I was moving it. That tripped me up for a little bit.
No, I'm just noodling around over here.
Oh my gosh, it's happening. Things are moving. So first of all, thank you. This is an awesome conversation. I'm super excited. I think it's a little easier for me because I work for myself and I can try to attract specific customers. So it's not even a matter of having this conversation of, I think you should go green, or I think we should explore sustainable options. I want to get to the point where that's why people come to me specifically. So I'm a branding and packaging designer, and I'm getting more and more into the space of sustainable packaging for sustainable products, which is fascinating. It's a fascinating world out there with all the variety of materials. And yes, there is an added cost to that, but I think there's value in attracting the clients that are they already know they want to invest. They already know it's worthwhile. And I don't want to get to the point where I will say, hey, I can do a sustainable option and a not so sustainable option. I only want to do, let's do the sustainable option. If you want something else, you should find someone else. So I know it can be tricky, especially since I think we are transitioning to a more sustainable way of doing things, to more sustainable materials. And sometimes there's fear of, what if the client doesn't understand the impact, the investment? What if they're not okay with spending more? But I think that there's value in just positioning yourself in a way that will attract those people specifically. I think they're called Bartlett brands. Yep, that's all they do. Though that's a branding packaging company. Like, they will only attract these types of clients. I'm sure their budgets are pretty big, but that's what they do, and that's what I want to do when I grow up.
Awesome.
Sounds
Yeah,
like you're already there.
I'm
Yeah.
getting there. I'm getting there. I have done 2 projects for packaging, sustainable packaging. One is for body care and hair care in aluminum bottles that are reusable. And the other one, it's actually a really cool concept. It is regenerative farming seaweed in California and Alaska. And it's interesting because when you think about renting space, you don't think about renting a part of the ocean. But that's what they do. They actually have a space in the ocean, and they dock their boats, and they grow the seaweed, which doesn't need anything. There's nothing they have to do really other than just harvest it. Then they dry it and they mill it and they put it in seasoning. So it's all about sustainability. It's all about regeneration. It's all about giving back. It's all about the reducing the carbon footprint. So they're totally on track as far as sustainable labels, jars, bags. But it's interesting because it's almost as if like we're trying to bypass that conversation. Like, it already happened in their head, it already happened in their minds, and they're coming to us for specifically sustainable options.
Yeah, because I think it fits, and as it should, it fits what they're doing, right?
Right.
Yeah, I know Rebecca from Bartlett Brand. She's awesome. She's a badass. And I imagine a world where there is no sustainable design, there is no climate design. It's just design, and what we're all here learning and doing is just it.
Mhm.
Okay. I hope that happens before I die. You know, I hope that happens sooner than later, right? But I think we're still in this like awkward, the way that I describe it is that, you know, us right now, 2023, we're kind of in this like pubescent stage where it's like we're going through puberty, where it's like we're old enough to know that we're old enough to know better, but not old enough to actually like do it, right? We're kind of in this like really weird stage. And so I hope that we all grow up and recognize our role as designers, and how other people are recognizing their role as business owners, employees, just people, right? And so Zuza, I think, with what it is that you're doing, great, put your flag in the ground, scream it off the top of a mountain saying, I am this person, I only want to work on this stuff. So if that's you, come on board. And it's going to be a great filter, right? If you say that up front on your website and on your marketing collateral, you're going to attract the people that, oh, she gets it. Great. I want to work with that person or this person or that person, that organization. And if that organization, and if another organization doesn't, and they just say, I don't know, it's not for, then great, right? But how do we get those designers who those organizations go to because they want the cheaper option? How do we educate them and encourage them to push that onto those organizations, right? And then I think too, I hope to see a world that we are not just, as designers, we're not just coming up with a sustainable solution for the thing that company does, the product, the service, or even experience, but that the whole company is that. The whole company is stepping into that space, right? And they're actually doing it. It's baked into their mission, so the kelp farm example, I'm a huge kelp farm advocate. I love all things kelp farming. Because it's already, that's what they do. No duh that they wouldn't want to work with someone like you, Zuza, right? Because it completes them. And I would love to see companies that we might today in 2023 or might not think that what they do is sustainable, but maybe soon they'll shift their business model, shift their business practices, their supply chains, whatever it is that they do, so that every single touch point in their business model incorporates that. And then it just is.
Great. We have 15 minutes left, so I wanted to make sure we have time to go through your resources at the end, and then more Q&A if possible. Sound good?
Great.
Perfect.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. All right. Continue the conversation.
Yeah, so we put together, Marc and I just sort of brainstormed all of the content, film, art that inspires us, and felt like we'd share some with you. Here's a few amazing films: 2040, Kiss the Ground, Seeding Change, all sort of taking different tacks on sustainability and business, and how it affects us as designers. And I think, Amanda, we'll be able to send out like links afterwards, right? So we'll definitely make sure to link all these as we go. But yeah, these are just a few. I think the next slide has even a few more.
I was going to say too, if you want to take screenshots of these slides with the names for yourselves for now, then this is being recorded so you can refer back to it, and then we will figure out how to send the resources after as well.
Yeah, and then some of my recommendations here, the story stuff I watched when I was in design school in the early aughts and mid aughts maybe, and it just completely changed how I viewed everything. And the other documentaries here, the Breakdown series, highly recommend it. They have 2 seasons. They're really short episodes. Casey, you just told me last night you blew through all the.
Yeah, Marc mentioned these. We were talking through these, and I'm aware of Earthrise, so everyone on the call, just go to YouTube and plug in Earthrise, their whole channel. Amazing. And as designers, like, and climate focused designers, I was blown away. I can't even believe it wasn't on my radar. I knew Earthrise, but not the Breakdown series. So good. The production value, the editing, the motion graphics, the storytelling, the content. One of the best, I think, pieces of content, videos I've seen out there. The Breakdown series specifically, but then everything that Earthrise puts out is fantastic. Peak Actions, I think, another one. I can't remember if we have a link or not, but we'll definitely call them out. But yeah, the Breakdown was fantastic. I blew through all of them like in the last day or two.
Yeah. I share the Breakdown. We watch it in my class, both seasons, in my climate designers class. And then the bottom 2, Century of the Self. It's a 4-part documentary series on Edward Bernays, who is credited as the godfather of public relations, and his uncle, surprisingly, was Sigmund Freud. And so he actually took a lot of Freud's teachings and applied it to business. And welcome to the mess we're in, y'all. Like, so it's a really amazing, but also very, very, I don't know, you'll get upset watching it. But Adam Curtis is an amazing documentary filmmaker. Those are all free on YouTube. Exterminate All the Brutes. It's not about design at all. It's about the history of global racism and capitalism and colonialism. Highly recommend it. It's also a heavy one as well. So it's
Yeah,
also a
that one will
four-part
make you angry
series.
as well.
Yeah, it's a 4-part series. I highly recommend watching one episode at a time and watch something light after as a palate cleanser. The next slide, I think it's some of Casey's examples.
So yeah, just, we're speaking about design and climate, and just wanted to share a few simple examples that we know and love. I'm sure many of you are aware of Shepard Fairey and Banksy, and there's just some really, amazing, strong communication. But like, these are tools to communicate these concepts, right? And it's just really powerful stuff. And when you see it and it's powerful and it works, and I don't want to use the word propaganda, but like, these poster design has been, a really powerful tool for social change and cultural shifting for decades, forever. So just wanted to show some visuals as we go through the talk.
Yeah, and the next example are some really great people and organizations doing some fun, interesting things. Culture jamming is kind of the practice of hijacking the world around us and inserting messages, in this case, hope, and questioning systems and rules and regulations in good ways, right? So Ollie Frost is an amazing creative person over in England. Ivan Cash used to be in the Bay Area. I believe now he's in LA. Brandalism, classic. Definitely check out their website. And then Climate Town. If you're not familiar with Climate Town, definitely check out Raleigh and the work that he's doing. Think of it as like a John Oliver, but focus on climate change solely.
Raleigh's awesome.
Deep dives into various topics around climate change. He got invited to the White House recently as part of young influencer groups coming into the White House, and having them be thanked by the administration for taking climate issues and conveying it in a way that is easy to understand. But highly recommend Climate Town. Support Raleigh, be a patron. And then the last slide here, a few links that I put in the deck here. I'm sure we can share the slides out because a lot of these are actual hyperlinks. But as I mentioned, I co-founded climatedesigners.org, which is an online community, a global community of designers taking climate action. We're about to teach a 3rd class on the Terra.do platform called Becoming a Climate Designer. There's the info page there. Climate Base is an amazing organization. If any of you are interested in learning more about climate, take a look at climatebase.org. Clean Creatives is another great organization. They're in the ad space, the advertising world. So check them out too. And then we have Casey's link there as well.
Yeah, and I just want to bring up, I just finished the 2nd cohort of the Climate Base Fellowship. And if you're not familiar with Climate Base, they are a resource for climate jobs. A lot of climate tech jobs on there, but I know, Marc, I think you're working with them on developing more design side opportunities. So that's super exciting. I was just lucky enough to be part of their latest cohort, which was a 9-week long fellowship where every day, at least 1 or 2 hours a day. So it was a bit of a time commitment, but they would have lectures, guest lectures, one-on-one meetings, networking events, and it's all on this amazing platform. I didn't know what I was getting into. I kind of signed up like literally like as it was starting, and I was like, oh, how much time? It is a time investment, but I have met and collaborated with so many amazing people, PhDs, researchers, scientists, sort of on the front lines, doing amazing climate work, and just the whole group is so positive and just exciting to work with. So that, check out Climate Base, fantastic resource. I know that the cohort 3, I think, is going to be starting up. Do you know the time frame on that, Marc? Is it in the next couple months?
I do not know.
Yeah, I think probably like early next year. I think Evan and his brother who run it, they're awesome, and they're based in San Francisco. So they had some in-person meetups, which was awesome as well. But highly recommend Climate Face. And then Marc's not going to boast, but climatedesigners.org is such an amazing platform and organization. Definitely check them out. I'm a huge fan. Marc's doing really great things over there, and I'm super excited about the climate designer, becoming a climate designer coursework as well. So I'll probably be signing up for that. And then, yeah, Serotonin, my company, we're a small branding and marketing firm, a year and a half out, but we're growing by the day, super excited. So always looking for amazing, talented folks to collaborate with. So feel free to, continue the dialogue. Love to make new connections.
Great. Well, we're just about at time. We have 6 more minutes. So before we run out of time, I do want to say thank you, both Casey and Marc, for such a robust and informative presentation, but also creating a space that's engaging and providing different levels of activism and ways to be engaged. And then everyone else, thank you for coming and showing up, being present and asking questions and being engaged in the presentation. That's always very important when we invite people such as Marc and Casey to, invest time into our community. I love to see that when we can invest back. So is there any last questions that you all have for these two before we head out? Comments?
I do want to take a minute to thank Amanda and Valentina as well for being our event volunteers for today and helping out with our only virtual event this week. So thank you.
Of course. So let's see, Samantha, you had a question?
Hey, yeah. Okay, so I just wanted to say thank you for this really great talk. It was really inspiring and really nice to see people in the kind of creative designer intersection. I feel like I really resonate with that kind of work. And I was just wondering, what you would suggest for trying to get into different agencies or consultancies as like a student coming out of a design degree, and how to best, sorry, I'm really nervous, and how to kind of get into that world as somebody with a little bit less design experience, but wanting to get into that.
And are you asking specifically to work with climate focused organizations?
I would really like to. Yeah.
So my recommendation would be, if you have existing projects, how could you revisit them and inject more climate focused decisions and ideas and outputs, things like that, right? So that's like, if you have existing projects, I believe that design is actually not just problem solving, but opportunity seeking. So what are some challenges out there that you think could be resolved through design? And so, stir up some side projects, come up with some ideas, maybe bring some friends on board and have as collaborators. And then this way you can control the project brief and then inject and have climate as a foundation of that. And so while you're learning the science, while you're understanding why we're in this mess and design's role, you're also creating at the same time. That's no doubt going to influence the work. And then, on your about page, for example, or in your portfolio, have a little blurb about you, but also your desire to be in the space, or how you're trying to incorporate both design and climate into your work. Like, be honest and be okay with identifying the fact that you're new to this. I think that's totally fine. Like, one thing I'll say is that human beings have never experienced anything like this before, ever. So there is no guidebook, there's no best practices, there's no hidden, notebook with all the answers somewhere on some mountaintop, in BFE, right? Like, we're all experiencing this for the first time together, and we are all going to address this and solve this together. And so there's going to be hurdles and road bumps. Not everyone knows all the answers. And so I think we all just need to come to terms with the fact that, yeah, we don't know everything. We need to teach ourselves how to say, I don't know in certain situations. And so if you're honest with that, then that's going to allow the person who's viewing your work to be honest with themselves and say, oh yeah, I don't know the answers too, but maybe collectively with your skills and your experience and your passion and all this other stuff. And then if you bring that to a team combined, I think you can really move the needle.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. I would add to that too. Be upfront about it. You know, if you get a job interview or you're speaking to someone a potential position, you know, ask them what sort of, you know, sustainable initiatives and projects that they have, what sort of culture, you know, is it like at the agency? Is sustainability part of that culture, you know, woven into the DNA of the brand? And just say, you know, hey, this is what I'm interested in. Are you guys, you know, what sort of projects and clients do you have within this space? This is my passion.
Thank you.
Great.
Awesome.
Okay. Any last thoughts before we sign out?
Well, I just want to say thank you to everyone on the call, to the Amandas, Sebastiani, and Sanchez. You guys are awesome. We really appreciate this opportunity. Marc and I have been over the moon excited about this, and I think, you know, this is the beginning of conversations, definitely not the end. So keep in touch and let's, you know, keep pushing.
Heck yeah. Thank you. Also, Marc, I went to CCA, so that
Oh, nice.
was really, really cool to hear that you're
Yeah.
teaching there and that there's a class called Climate Designers now.
Yes.
So I will probably reach out to you separately.
Go for it. Yeah. And if anyone wants to follow up, my email is in my Zoom name.
Oh, if you go to the next slide, please, Amanda, I think our contact's there. There you go.
Oh yeah, there you go.
There you go. Take a screenshot. We'll send this out after, it sounds like, too. So
Awesome.
great.
Outstanding.
Everyone, take care. Be well.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.